And tonight we're hearing from some local lawmakers about the assassination attempt on former President Trump. Northern News Now's Jeffrey McClure joins us in studio to break down their reactions and the impact the shooting may have going forward. Jeffrey?
Yeah, Rob, I was able to speak with both Congressman Pete Stauber and Senator Amy Klobuchar today. The lawmakers sit on different sides of the aisle, but both agree that these actions need to be condemned. Klobuchar made mention of two national politicians, Gabby Giffords and Steve Scalise, who were victims of shooting attempts, and says disagreements can happen, but the violence needs to be stopped. Klobuchar believes that politicians must think about upping their security following an incident like this. Ahead of some upcoming campaign events, local police departments have already reached out to offer her more protection. Klobuchar offered prayers to Trump, his family, and all those affected.
Is a travesty and a stain on our democracy. And that's why it is so important to note at this time that despite all our differences, there is more that unites us as a country that divides us.
According to the United States Capitol Police, they investigated over 8,000 cases of threats to members of Congress in 2023. As for Republican Congressman Pete Stauber, he was shocked by yesterday's incident and says that by the grace of God, the former president is alive following the assassination attempt, and hopefully we can use the event to come together.
I think that, a moment like this, we have to remember that we're Americans first. Irregardless of political party or your political ideology, we are Americans first. And I think, again, political violence is never the answer. We can disagree on policies, etc., but it should never resort to violence.
Stauber praised Trump for being strong in the face of danger. Many other Northland lawmakers released statements after the incident. Representatives Tom Tiffany and Angie Sapik sent in the following statements. Tiffany's statement said, in part, violence has no place in our society. His prayers are with Trump, all the attendees, and the families of those who were caught in the crossfire. Tiffany added that he has no doubt former President Trump will continue to fight for America. Sapik's statement says, in part, it's important that we take a moment to reflect before reaction. As a vehement supporter of President Donald Trump, this is difficult for her to see, and she sees many others sharing the same sentiment. Sapik praised the brave members of the Secret Service and law enforcement. Many other lawmakers from our region posted on social media shortly after the assassination attempt, including Governors Tim Walz, Tony Evers, and Senators Tammy Baldwin, Tina Smith, and Ron Johnson. Those are just a few of the lawmakers from our region and beyond who've shared their thoughts following the shooting. This is a story we'll continue covering. Rob?
All right, thanks, Jeffrey. Well, President